Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Friday, February the 3rd, 2023. We've been looking at, again, that passage in Matthew 6, primarily in these, since Wednesday, on those final verses where Jesus said, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I mentioned this in my sermon on Sunday, but it's this idea that we sometimes think if our heart's in the right place, then everything else will follow. And Jesus is kind of saying the opposite of that, isn't it? That where your treasure is, where you put your money, where you save your money, where you direct your money and your financial resources, that's where your heart is. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. Your heart follows, your treasure. It's a heart issue, as Mike Ward from GSB Fundraising has said. So we continue to look at that. What does that mean? I came across an interesting story about a prominent businessman who, at a luncheon, announced his decision to give away a significant amount of money to his alma mater, and I think some other worthy causes and charities as well. But lo and behold, it caused a great division within his family because the money was coming out of what his children believed to be their rightful inheritance. But the man who once found great joy in drinking had this life-changing, life-saving experience through his faith. But one of his children asked him why he was giving away so much money. And when he replied that it brought him great joy, the child pointedly asked why he didn't go back to drinking. As John Williams writes, the peace of a new life in Christ was the lack of peace in one who didn't understand or accept it. And it's interesting because this story goes back, a number of years, and I just happened to see on my Apple News feed today a very similar thing where somebody was complaining online, and I guess their tweet or whatever was reproduced. They were complaining that their father was, who's retired and had, a little bit of wealth, was enjoying doing some of the things in his retirement, like traveling and so on and so forth. And this child of this man who was being able to enjoy some of these things in his later years was resentful because that was taking away from the money he would leave behind for this child. And of course, the reaction on Twitter was, pretty swift and harsh against the child. But there's this, what do you value? And in the case of the first story that I told, the man came to an understanding that it's more than just what you can amass for yourself, but what can you do with it? How can you use it for others? Somebody once said that we should measure wealth not by the things that we have, but by the things that you have for which you would not take money. Measure our wealth not by the things we have, but by the things that we have for which we would not take any money. And here's another interesting thing, and this goes back in several decades, but I haven't seen anything to contradict it. But according to a Gallup survey, almost half of the total charitable contributions in the U.S. Come from households with incomes of less than $30,000. In other words, proportionately, not only proportionately, that altogether the charitable contributions come from people who can least afford it, but proportionately, they give much more of their financial resources to charitable organizations, including the church, than the rich do. Isn't that an interesting phenomenon? There's also, I want to kind of close with the story about someone who kind of changed in their thinking. Former seminary professor and pastor George Gaston tells the following stories that talks about attitude and giving. He writes, "Years ago, I pastored a church that decided to build a new worship center. The old building had suffered a major fire. Even so, our decision to build a new facility didn't come easy. For months, we agonized over the thought of tearing down a building which had served as a place of worship for nearly 50 years. Some of the membership felt it best to simply remodel the old building, while others believed that the time had come to start anew. And after all the practical considerations were analyzed, we voted to construct a new place to meet God in worship. Well, some of our best church families had opposed the proposal to undertake this new construction, and on the Monday morning following the church's vote to build, I was met at my office by a man who had spoken forcefully against building. And he rehearsed with me again all the reasons why the church shouldn't have decided to construct a new building. But then, with tears in his eyes, he looked at me and said, "But I love this church, and I'm going to support it." And with that, he took out his checkbook and wrote a check for $1,000, making the first contribution to our building fund. And he continued, "My wife and I have decided not to buy the new car that we wanted. We'll be giving all that money now for a new church. We can buy that car later on." That one family's action, he says, was something of a catalyst for our church. They began to prompt others to give their best in expressing love for God and church. I was privileged in those days to share similar conversations with many others who discovered the joy of rearranging their priorities to declare a new commitment. As we all found the joy of cheerful, faith-filled giving, we saw our church experience a revival. During that time, Sunday school attendance increased dramatically, as did our financial contributions to the larger church. We baptized more people during the days of our building program than we did during the rest of the time I served as pastor of that congregation. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Well, I'll be with you one more day to finish our conversation of this key passage and key words that Jesus spoke in terms of the treasures we have here on earth and how we use them and where we dedicate them. Until then, take care. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.